Have you ever wondered what might be lurking in the shadows of your home when you're all alone? Picture this: a quaint, isolated house nestled in the heart of the suburbs, where the whispers of the wind are often the only sounds that break the silence. This is our setting, the stage for a tale that will chill you to your core. In this house lives our protagonist, a young man with a heart full of courage and a spirit of adventure. He's home alone for the weekend, his family away on a trip. He'd always relished such solitude, the freedom to do as he pleased without any interruptions. But this time something felt different. As the day progressed, a sense of unease began to creep into his heart, almost as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what, he couldn't quite tell. The bright cheerful room seemed to darken a little too quickly as the sun dipped below the horizon. The shadows lengthened, and an uncanny silence fell, broken only by the occasional creaks and groans of the old house settling in for the night. He tried to brush off the unease, attributing it to an overactive imagination. Perhaps he was just not used to the silence, or maybe it was the isolation. After all, the nearest neighbor was a good half-mile away. But as he looked out of the window into the inky blackness, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, casting an eerie gloom that made the shadows seem alive. As the night fell, he could not shake off an eerie feeling that something was amiss. He tried to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the goosebumps that erupted on his arms. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, but deep down he knew something wasn't quite right. Something was off. Something was lurking in the darkness. And as the clock chimed midnight, he was about to find out what it was. The house's familiar creaks and groans seemed to take on a more sinister tone that night. The old wooden beams, which usually whispered of age and stability, began to echo with an eerie rhythm, like a slow, relentless heartbeat pulsating through the darkness. As the protagonist sat alone in the silent living room, his attention was drawn to a series of soft thuds emanating from upstairs. It was an unsettling sound, like the muffled footfalls of someone trying not to be heard. He tried to dismiss it as the house settling, the wind perhaps, but the pattern was too regular, too deliberate. Then came the creaking of a door, a drawn-out, pitchy whine that seemed to cut through the stillness of the night. The sound, like a sigh from some unseen specter, sent chills skittering down his spine. He tried to convince himself that it was just the old house's way of singing its age-old lullaby, but the song tonight was far from comforting. As he strained his ears, he began to hear what sounded like whispers. Distant and indistinct, they seemed to drift through the walls, a ghostly conversation carried on the wind. His mind raced, attempting to piece together the unintelligible murmurs into something logical, something mundane. But the harder he listened, the more the whispers twisted into sinister secrets, chilling tales spun by unseen lips. In his attempt to rationalize, he found himself falling deeper into fear. Each explanation he conjured only served to amplify his dread, painting vivid images of unseen trespassers in his mind. The wind became an intruder, the settling house a stalking phantom, the whispers a spectral council deliberating his fate. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drum echoing the house's haunting rhythm. The more he tried to deny it, the more he felt an unshakable presence in the house. The ominous noises, once merely quirks of an old home, were now a chilling symphony of fear playing out in the gloom. And as each note resonated through the silent night, he was left with the unnerving sensation that he was not, in fact, home alone. As he ventured upstairs to investigate, he was met with an ominous sight. The narrow hallway, usually blanketed in comforting darkness, was now awash with a pale, sickly glow. It emanated from the one place he least expected, the attic door. A door that was always locked, a door that held within it years of forgotten family history, was now standing conspicuously open. A chill ran down his spine as he approached the yawning opening. The door, usually a barrier to the dust-laden memories of yesteryears, was now an invitation into a realm of unknown terror. The air seemed to thicken with each step he took, the silence of the night punctuated only by the eerie creaking of the old wooden floorboards underfoot. As he peered into the attic, his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The attic, usually a chaotic mess of heirlooms and keepsakes, was now eerily organized. The boxes, once stacked haphazardly, were now neatly arranged in a row. The old rocking chair, usually covered in a layer of dust, was now clean and rocking gently, as though recently used. The photo albums, once buried under piles of old clothes, were now spread open, their pages fluttering in the draft. Everything was displaced, everything was wrong. It was as if an invisible intruder had rifled through his family's past, leaving behind a chilling tableau of rearranged objects. The shadows seemed to dance menacingly around the items, whispering tales of a presence that was not supposed to be there. The air was heavy with an unsettling blend of fear and confusion. He stood at the threshold of the attic, his breath hitching in his throat. The sight before him was a stark reminder that he was not alone. That something, or someone, was sharing his space, lurking in the corners of his home, hiding in the very walls that were supposed to protect him. The attic, a place of forgotten memories, had become a site of unfathomable horror. His heart pounded in his chest as he descended back into the depths of the house. The air was heavy with an unnameable dread, an invisible shroud that clung to every corner, every crevice. Each step he took echoed through the silence, a chilling reminder of his isolation. The darkness was almost tangible, a thick veil that swallowed the weak light from his trembling flashlight. He could feel it creeping in the edges of his vision, a hungry predator waiting to claim him. His breath hitched as a cold gust of wind brushed past him, carrying with it an eerie, disembodied whisper that seemed to say, "You're not alone." A chill ran down his spine as the realization hit him. He was being hunted. An unseen entity, a specter of the night, was playing a terrifying game of cat and mouse with him. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, every shadow that seemed to move just out of the corner of his eye, was a reminder of the horrifying presence that lurked within the house. He could feel his heart drumming an erratic rhythm in his chest, the fear making his blood run icy cold. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to make himself invisible, to become one with the shadows. But the entity was relentless. It was as if it could smell his fear, sense his presence. He could hear it moving, a low guttural growl echoing through the otherwise silent house. It was a terrifying dance with the unknown, a deadly tango that could end in only one way. He was trapped in his own home, a place that was supposed to be his sanctuary, now turned into a nightmare. The familiar surroundings took on a sinister aspect. Each room a potential death trap, each hallway a tunnel leading to the unknown. He tried to gather his courage to fight the fear that was threatening to consume him. But the entity was always one step ahead, always lurking in the shadows, always reminding him of its presence. He was caught in its web, a helpless prey in the face of an unimaginable horror. With every passing moment, the house he once called home became a labyrinth of terror. As dawn approached, the protagonist found himself in a fight for survival. The darkness that had once been a comforting blanket became a threatening shroud, hiding the unknown entity that stalked his home. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, each beat echoing the ticking seconds until daylight. He had become a prisoner in his own home, each room a potential trap, each shadow a potential threat. His once familiar surroundings took on a sinister quality, the silence of the house amplifying the terror that gripped him. He tried to barricade the doors to secure the windows, but how do you protect yourself from something that isn't bound by the laws of the physical world? The hours seemed to stretch into infinity, each minute a test of his courage and will to survive. He found strength in his fear, using it to fuel his desperate attempts to stay safe. Every creak, every rustle of the wind against the house sent icy tendrils of fear coiling around his heart. But he held on, his determination fueled by the promise of the approaching dawn. And then, finally, the first rays of sunlight pierced the gloom. The shadows that had seemed so ominous began to recede, replaced by the comforting familiarity of his home. The entity, whatever it was, seemed to have disappeared with the darkness. Relief washed over him, leaving him trembling and exhausted but alive. But even as he reveled in the safety of daylight, a chilling thought struck him. As the sun rose, he couldn't help but wonder, was it all just a nightmarish figment of his imagination? Or was his home harboring a terrifying secret? Had he truly been alone in the house, or had he shared his sanctuary with something far more sinister? The question lingered, casting a shadow over his relief, a stark reminder of the terror of the night.